It's a political issue, but it's also, a concern for whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It's a concern that a lot of people have about Medicare Advantage, about privatization of Social Security, and we're going to talk about that right now. Again, Dan Adcock joins us via video from Washington, D.C. He is the Director of Government Relations and Policy, and we welcome him to the broadcast. Great to have you on the Jeff Santos Show, video style. I think the last time we had you on was just a radio show, Dan, so welcome.
Well, thanks for having me back, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to have you back. Looking good. All right, so we got lots to chat about. Again, as I mentioned, we'll try to talk to one of our great callers, Mark, who has been talking about this issue with Scott. So let me lay it down before we get into more political stuff. When you have a senator who is the head of the senatorial campaign committee on the Republican side, yesterday, having Twitter photos, selfies in front of the White House, what this does is it's not just an issue that, is discussed in the cloakrooms of Capitol Hill. This is now front and center. This is going to be plastered all over the country to, once again, provide more disinformation to the American people that the rescue plan is going to help them. The rescue plan is only going to help billionaires. That's what the rescue plan is for. This is outrageous. Your thoughts on this, and what is, the role of the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare and others to sort of combat this disinformation campaign and this disgusting nonsense?
Sure, and thanks, Jeff. So first, let me talk about what Senator Scott has proposed and again, in his capacity as the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. He suggested that all federal laws have to be essentially, they would sunset after 5 years, and then thereafter they would essentially have to be reauthorized. It's a technical legislative term. And so, well, when we're talking about all federal laws, we're also talking about the laws that created the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid programs. There's a reason why when these programs were created, respectively in 1935 by President Franklin Roosevelt and then by Lyndon Johnson back in 1965, why these programs didn't require to be reauthorized, that they basically were running on automatic pilot because they were intended to be permanent programs. And the funding for these programs are technically called mandatory programs. That wasn't an accident either, because these were supposed to be permanent programs that Congress didn't have to go back to every year to revisit to authorize funding for, because it's set in the law were specific benefit formulas with regard to Social Security and then coverage in terms of Medicare that people could rely on, and they could plan their futures based on that amount. But the minute you do something like what Senator Scott is suggesting, that every 5 years that you have to reauthorize these programs, then you throw a lot of doubt into programs that previously they're rock solid, that you didn't have to worry about. And not only is there an opportunity for Congress to not renew these programs, but also an opportunity every 5 years to make cuts to benefits. And that would be a catastrophe given the current retirement crisis we're facing.
Oh, no doubt. Again, talking with Dan Adcock, Director of Government Relations and Policy for the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Our good friend Jim Roosevelt sits on the board. And, of course, we talk to Mr. Adcock's colleague, the President Max Richmond, all the time. For those of you who are not familiar, they, along with our friends at Social Security Works and our good friend Wendell Potter, all are very much engaged in trying to protect Social Security and Medicare as we move along. The other day, Dan, we had on Wendell Potter, and we were talking about the fact that this Medicare Advantage plans now, what I see is that it used to be just on some of the reruns. Live with family members who like to watch the Gunsmokes of the world that appeared 40 years ago now on INSP and other shows. And one of the advertisers is this Medicare Advantage plan. I think it's underwritten by our friends at United, and I'm not being facetious, of course. And they bring out Joe Namath and pay him a hefty salary. They bring out William Shatner of Star Trek fame, and all these folks to try to bamboozle them. Our good friend J.J. Walker from Good Times. Again, I don't know him. To try to influence with people who, remember that TV show, particularly in the African American community. And this is the stuff that really aggravates me to no end. They're just basically lying to people about what you can do. Oh yeah, you're gonna get free dental. You're gonna do all these fabulous things. But tell me again, because Wendell and I have been trying to figure out a way to maybe do what they do with cigarettes years ago. The Surgeon General has warned, look at the fine print when you're calling up to even find out about, never mind actually get the Medicare Advantage plan. But to me, give us an idea of what happens when you call up and you sign on the dotted line for Medicare Advantage. It is very difficult to get out of that plan. Can you give us a little understanding of that?
Sure. It's difficult, but not impossible. I think that the bigger problem for people that want to switch back to traditional Medicare, which, by the way, once people find out that within Medicare, private Medicare Advantage plans, they have a limited network of doctors and hospitals they can use, and a much broader network, broader availability of doctors and hospitals through traditional Medicare, what they will do is they can move back to traditional Medicare. But the hitch there, and this is a big one, is that when you first sign up for Medicare when you turn 65, you have a brief period of time in which you are guaranteed issue of a Medigap supplemental plan that wraps around traditional Medicare. And it's something you definitely need unless you want to have very huge out-of-pocket costs.
Right.
So what happens, though, if let's say you wait till age 70 and all of a sudden you start having health problems, and there's somebody you want to see at the Mayo Clinic, but you can't because they're not covered by your Medicare Advantage plan. So you switch back to traditional Medicare. But by that time, you're no longer guaranteed a Medigap plan because pre-existing conditions can be considered as to whether you're going to get one or not, and then you're screwed.
Yeah, no, that's a case that I've heard in the past. All right, let's switch to what Scott is talking about in the privatization of Social Security here. I mean, this is a plan, created by Roosevelt. Even though we don't have a photograph or a poster of him behind us, we are big fans on this show. We actually promote the new economic Bill of Rights that our good friends Harvey Kaye, who's on with us on Fridays, and Alan Minsky from Progressive Democrats of America on Monday. And as you know, we also have our good friend Jim Roosevelt on, who of course is the grandson of FDR. And we talk about Social Security, as it is part of the anchor of America and one of the greatest pieces of legislation this country has ever seen. Take Scott's idea of the privatization, and what does that do to the average Social Security recipient? Of course, people under 65 also get it if they have disabilities, but for the most part, we're talking a lot of seniors. How does that work? I mean, we're going to play Russian roulette on the stock market?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the long-term issue is that all of a sudden those trust funds that are currently held in U.S. Treasury securities, which are considered objectively as the safest investment anywhere in the world. That's why you see foreign governments invest in U.S. Treasury securities. All of a sudden, you're introducing those reserves in the Social Security Trust Fund to the volatility of the stock market. And as we're seeing right now in the last several weeks, the market's been down. And this was also a huge problem, of course, back in the whole mortgage crisis back in 2006 and 2007, where people who are all set to retire, and because so much of today's employer-sponsored retirement benefits are in defined contribution 401ks, then all of a sudden they had to wait several years in order to regain what they had lost during that economic downturn. So why you would want to risk that particular part of your retirement income to the risks of the stock market, it boggles the mind, but it certainly is something that has been the rallying cry for people on the right for a long time.
Well, yeah, a lot of these folks, they have golden nest eggs because these are folks that make, $10 million a year minimum in some cases as CEOs. Some are 50 million, some are 500 million. So they don't have to worry about retirement. It's all there, in their safes or hidden somewhere in a Caribbean bank account or a Swiss bank account. It's much different. But if you made 35K a year, which is the average American salary, you don't have Swiss bank accounts. You don't have money hidden somewhere in the Caribbean. You're trying to make it through the difficulties of the transition from having a full paycheck to Social Security and whatever other sort of savings you may have. And it's not a lot, as most reports, particularly with baby boomers today, talking about that they don't have the income that, say, previous generations did in retirement. So there's all of these issues. So to me, this is really a major five-car alarm, or however you want to use the cliche. And there needs to be a lot of publicity. And I'm wondering about this plan. I'm wondering what you believe is the best approach to alert Americans, not only seniors, but those like myself who are in their 40s and 50s, who, maybe, looking at this ahead of time, and, they want to have the benefits that their parents and grandparents have had. And it may not be there if we allow someone like Senator Scott and his cronies, the guy running for re-election in Wisconsin. We're soon to be back on the air, more on that later in the show in Wisconsin. And, my feeling is that this needs to be, told to every American in this country, particularly seniors, about what is going on. Your thoughts?
Right. Well, and then just to get back to another issue that's a problem with privatization, this is something that we need to talk to Americans broadly about. Is there's huge transition costs to moving Social Security to the stock market, so that it basically diverts money that's currently coming in from payroll taxes that's being held as reserves in the Social Security Trust Fund and goes into the market. Well, that means that your solvency, the insolvency of the Social Security Trust Fund is sped up to be even sooner, and that leaves current retirees holding the bag in terms of what they might receive in the future. I think the good news about privatization is that we already know it's hugely unpopular, regardless of who's done polling, and also regardless of party affiliation. When people respond to polls on privatizing Social Security, again, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they all think it's a bad idea. And luckily, we have a really good track record on defeating proposals like this, because this, of course, is what President George W. Bush wanted to do after he was elected in 2004. Right. Remember, he famously said,
I remember that.
I'm going to use my political capital now. And guess what? Several months later, the whole thing was down the tubes because groups like the National Committee and others, we really rallied all our folks, and we were able to kill it. And that's why up until recently, you really haven't even heard much about privatization. So it is a little surprising that, especially, you also know that Blake Masters, who's the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in Arizona, specifically said that he favored privatization. And then not long after that, he walked that comment back. But it's funny, back in 2008, when he was a political science major at Stanford University,
give me a break.
He must have been like either drunk or hungover when all this was going on, because he also called this a fresh and innovative idea. Well, there's nothing
innovative,
yes,
about
it. Yeah,
I guess he hasn't been studying history of the Republican Party over the last 20 years, has he?
Right.
It's just pathetic. And this is where they are. I was joking with a friend of mine yesterday. I says this is the American Rescue Plan for billionaires. That's what it is. Make sure they don't have any tax increases. Look, when Senator Sanders wants to, and he's a big fan, as you can see in background here, of the Vermont senator, and he is looking to expand Social Security. He's looking to tighten up Medicare and find ways to expand that. Of course, he's for Medicare for all, and it is that sort of approach. And I'm wondering how Washington, which sometimes is a little bit slower to react to, more progressive legislation. You understand, I lived there for 9 years. I mean, it's not easy to sort of move the battleship of Washington, even 3 inches sometimes. But we have now had a bunch of years going back to the Bush 2 second term, in this century, that has opened the idea of privatization, that has opened the idea to more and more of the donut hole in Medicare. So do you think that they're saying, look, we need to continue to look at what Bernie is doing and others to expand Social Security, to look at where Medicare has worked and maybe expand that 55, whatever. What are you hearing? What are your thoughts about, how we navigate these next few years, particularly if the Democrats can hold on to the House and Senate and maybe expand in the Senate?
Well, right now there's a bill that's received serious consideration in the House. Is very similar to Senator Sanders' legislation introduced by Congressman John Larson of Connecticut, who also happens to be the chair of the House Social Security Subcommittee. We're hoping that before Congress adjourns for this session, that the House will take it up. The bill has over 200 co-sponsors, not just short of the 218 that would be needed to pass the House. But we think that if you put a bill like this on the House floor, that not only would Democrats not only would the Democrats who have yet to co-sponsor the legislation be hard pressed to vote against it, you would think that there might be some Republicans in competitive districts that might feel the same way.
No doubt. Again, we're talking with Dan Adcock, Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. And of course, he is the Director of Government Relations and Policy. Let's go to the phones. We'll start with Mark in San Francisco, go to John in Minnesota after that. Go right ahead, Mark. You are next with Dan Adcock here on the Jeff Santos Show. Mark, can you hear me? Three, two. Okay. All right. Let me know if we also have Josh too. If we go there first, if there's a problem with Mark's phone line. Dan, while we're waiting for some technical issues to be resolved, let me propose this situation. Do you feel that if the Democrats were to, as a lot of people, 3 months ago was completely the opposite, where they thought there would be a disaster and House and Senate would be lost. But if the Democrats were to hold on to the majority in the House and, maybe get people in Wisconsin to vote for Mandela Barnes and Fetterman in Pennsylvania, and hold on to what they already have with the 50 plus Ms. Harris, could they, look at both expansion models, protection more of expansion of Social Security, protection and expansion of Medicare? I mean, are those things that you and your organization and your colleagues across the, progressive landscape, again, Social Security Works, our good friend Wendell Potter and what he's done, to be able to move that legislation? Is that something you think is real?
Well, the National Committee will certainly push for it, but I guess what we would have to assess after the election is whether there would be enough votes in the Senate to overturn the filibuster, because unfortunately that's the only way we're going to make changes to Social Security, is that ordinarily Social Security is subject to 60 votes for approval.
Right.
And that's the only way we could pass either Senator Sanders' legislation or Congressman Larson's legislation to expand benefits and also solvency, with regard to doing things like building upon the prescription drug price reform that was done in the Inflation Reduction Act. You could do that through a procedure called budget reconciliation. That
then you could do 50 plus 1, right?
That's right. So that's doable, provided you can get the 50. Provided you could make sure that you get all the Democrats and the independents like Bernie, who caucus with the Democrats, in line to vote for that. So I think that has a greater chance. It just depends on. I think a lot of folks have been focusing on that. If to get enough senators, Democratic senators, to support overturning the filibuster, you're going to need to have a 52 vote majority so that you can make up for the loss of Senator Manchin and Sinema on the filibuster.
Right. Right, no doubt. And then there are a couple of others too that are a little bit, squeamish on going forward. The Coons of the world and others. Let me ask you. Let me ask my producer Josh. Do we have the availability of Mark or John to ask a question or two? In my ear, Josh? No. All right. Let me throw another one at you. Do you look at certain parts of the country? I've been saying to a lot of my friends, they should be talking about Scott and the Marco Rubio race. That's where Miss Demings has got a good chance to knock him off. They should be talking about it with Charlie Crist, the former Republican governor, now the Democratic nominee for governor in Florida against DeSantis. They should be talking about it in Arizona. Again, you get Katie Hobbs as governor. I've been joking for a long time, Dan, that, she becomes governor and then she has the ability to call up Joe Biden and said, hey, we can solve two birds with one stone. Send Sinema to become the ambassador to France or Italy. She can have all the wine she wants. As you know, she's a wine intern. Only person I ever met in my life who's a senator and an intern at the same time. And you can appoint a really good progressive Democrat like Mr. Gallego, the Iraqi war vet. So you can do a lot of good things if you win these elections. These are important issues, and I think in places like Arizona and Florida, where you have a large senior population, why not utilize that information and, maybe win a couple of elections?
That would be great. I mean, this is the challenge that we've been facing for a long time, is that seniors, most seniors for the last several election cycles have been tending to vote for Republicans, and arguably, from our standpoint, vote against their own best interests. I mean, obviously, they're voted by other issues other than Social Security and Medicare, or just assumed that Republicans, weren't going to do anything on those issues. But the reality is, when we heard from the likes of Senator Scott and Senator Ron Johnson, and it's Blake Masters again, who's the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in Arizona, it's very clear they're saying the soft part out loud, because most Republicans who are at least politically astute understand that you basically give lip service and platitudes to Social Security and Medicare without ever saying out loud that you want to cut them or privatize them. And Senator Scott and Johnson and Blake Masters have given voice to that by saying exactly what the Republicans would do if they have the majority. And that's what we need. That's what we need to get out to seniors in places like Arizona and Florida, so they understand that they really need to think hard about voting for Marco Rubio against Val Demings in Florida. So,
no, those races are there for the taking, and why not utilize Scott in his own home state, and similarly in Arizona, where there's a large population. And again, you get 2 for 1. Defeat the Masters and replace a phony progressive and phony Democrat of Sinema with Gallego. Let her go and drink all the wine she wants. Thanks, Dan Adcock. Appreciate it, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it too.
Appreciate you.